Calgary has the lowest taxes in Canada. So if you're living there, if you're buying a home there, if you're buying groceries there, if you're, all the normal things that you would do to sustain life that you would have in the GTA, it's going to cost you much, much less in Calgary.
Hey, Mindy, thank you so much for joining us today at Canadian Real Estate 101 podcast. How are you?
I'm great. It's a lovely day outside and just keeping busy with my clients. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to come chat with you guys about my real estate experiences.
Yep. So a lot of listeners probably do not know who you are, but we have had a couple of interactions before, so I understand a little bit more. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey? Who is Mindy? What do you do? How you got into the world of real estate and how you have been helping clients so far?
Sure. Thanks, Supriya. So my name is Mindy Kahlon. I am a real estate agent here in the GTA. I do most of my work, I would say about 50% within the Toronto core, and then the other 50% or so all over the GTA. So in neighborhoods like Oakville, Mississauga, Markham, Scarborough, Burlington, Hamilton. I mean, you name it. I kind of effectively go where my clients take me. I've been in real estate for several years now. Before real estate, my path was actually a little bit different. I've worked the last 13 years in consulting. So effectively, I worked for all of the banks at least twice over. Interesting work. I loved it. It gave me a great base for kind of the work that I do today. I always can bring that that level of kind of finance to the role, and it gives me a better understanding of kind of where my clients are. So essentially, fast forward a couple of years later, this is where I am now. I work with Remax West. I specifically work with an amazing group of people that, are known as Platinum Condo Broker. So we actually have collectively pre-construction access to projects all across the GTA and Ontario, and even some that are outside of Ontario that I'll be touching on a little bit later today.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good. So how did you decide to jump from consulting into real estate expert? Like, how did you decide to make that switch? What was your story? What was your inspiration behind?
So it's an interesting one. It's funny because being in real estate, I find almost everybody has some kind of interest in real estate, whether they own a property, whether they're considering purchasing one in the near future, or if they're looking at selling theirs. Even if that's not their situation, everybody kind of has some kind of interest in real estate. And I mean, I was no different, right? Specifically in my family, we have, developers. So I kind of always was working with my family and network to kind of secure some of those deals unofficially. And then as time kind of had it, I ended up kind of thinking that I wanted to go into the more structured route in real estate. So once I decided that real estate was my thing, I kind of just dove right into it, and I really wanted to do it full time. I really wanted to give it my all, and since then, I've been actively full time doing real estate.
Okay, great. So when did you move along with your real estate? Like, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago on your own when you started branching? Okay.
So it's been this month will have be 3 years of me in real estate. Yes.
Yes, good. So you have kind of seen everything that a typical real estate agent would see in 30 years. You've seen the market.
Honestly, yes.
Cool.
I mean, I joined just before COVID, so I got all the ebbs and flows that came with that.
Talk about perfect way to train yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Decades of experience just in 2.5. So that's
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, great. Now moving along, you are surrounded with some amazing people who are some very smart investors. And while we were talking about the topic for today, this really excited me. So your journey as a real estate investor and a real estate agent in Calgary started a few months ago. Let's touch base upon how did that come about? Like, why Calgary, and how was your experience? How did you start researching on the city?
It's interesting because that's usually the question I get from at least 50% of people, which is like, why Calgary? Right. I mean, today you could say to me, Mindy, I have, this much money set aside for my investment. And where should I buy? What's the best place for me to buy? What's the cheapest place for me to buy? And I could tell you to buy a house or a condo in Antarctica, right? And it would be cheap. It really would. But would it make sense to actually invest in a place like that, right? Calgary makes sense, right? So Calgary is, the way I see it, what Toronto was just over a decade ago, right? In my family, my father was very prominent and very open about my real estate experiences, and kind of having his children, pick up real estate as an asset early on. So about a decade or so ago, I did purchase pre-construction in Toronto. I mean, I purchased it kicking and screaming because they're difficult to put those payments together. If anyone has done pre-construction, you'll know that. But in hindsight, I was like, wow, like you're purchasing a property that's going to be appreciating year over year. And at the time, if somebody had used the coin word, cash flow positive to me, I would have picked up more than what I picked up. And I'm sure many investors that are in that boat today always think that, like, oh my God, hindsight's 2020. I should have probably bought more, right? Well, flash forward now, we're not in a position where in Toronto or in the GTA, you can purchase a pre-construction property and be cash flow positive. And to be clear, what I mean by that is, so investors purchase properties so that they can rent it out so somebody else can live in it and pay rent to them. That rent, if it is lower than what you're paying for mortgage, then you're cash flow positive because you don't have to put anything in separately every month. Those opportunities just don't exist in the GTA anymore because purchase prices have gone up, right? So something we would have purchased for late 200s or 300,000, 12 years ago in Toronto is now $750,000, which means your mortgage is going to be more, which means, whatever rent you're collecting every month is not going to cover your mortgage. So it means you have to put in some kind of money, whether that's $500 or $1,000 every month to cover that cost. So Calgary offers that opportunity. They are a growing city. It's in Canada, so it's very, very comfortable for people. You're not investing in Florida or investing in, Africa, another country that maybe we're not so familiar with. It's Canada. So there's that element of comfort that we get from it. And secondly, you could weigh in on this, Supriya, but, people often ask, well, how do I get a mortgage? Like for Calgary, you actually get it the exact same way you'd get one for a property you owned here in the GTA. You walk into a branch and you just get a mortgage, right? Because mortgages are national.
You can just call me directly.
Yes, exactly. Which is great because you actually have quite a bit of experience with mortgages in Calgary, which I was really happy to hear, right? Because most people that work here kind of are actively working with folks that are buying and selling here in Ontario. But I know we've spoken before and you've mentioned you've done many in Calgary before. So, you could speak to also how simple of a process that actually is.
Simple. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So pretty much what you had said, like go to your bank or your mortgage advisor and help them fill out the application, provide the documents that they're looking for. And if you qualify, you need to, the great thing I find about the Calgary market, like you had said, that the prices are similar to what Toronto was maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it still fits the affordability for a lot of people. Brand new condo, 300, 325, something around that range, you can easily purchase in Calgary. And there has been, at least from my experience, the clients that I'm serving, there has been not a mass exodus, but there are a lot of people considering who are purchasing their first property, their either first primary residence or even as an investment out in Calgary because the prices are very affordable. With the pandemic, their jobs are remote these days. So as far as we can get an employment letter stating that yes, your employer does not have any issues working from anywhere throughout Canada and it's 100% remote. Guess what? You can pick up that Toronto salary and actually work from a place like Calgary, which has cheaper, housing prices and stuff.
And that's exactly what it is, right? Calgary has the lowest taxes in Canada. So if you're living there, if you're buying a home there, if you're buying groceries there, if you're, all the normal things that you would do to sustain life that you would have in the GTA, it's going to cost you much, much less in Calgary. And that goes hand in hand with the housing. So some of the price points that you touched on is exactly kind of what we're seeing. You could purchase condos, and even sometimes condo townhouses in the low 300s. I mean, some of the prices range on the higher end of the 300s, maybe even into the 450 range. But these are like large units, right? Like 2-bedroom, 2-bath, a den, parking and locker. Unfortunately, with Toronto being as developed as it is, those are very tough to actually get because they're very unaffordable. Like an average 1-bedroom in the core in Toronto will easily cost you around 750,000. And I mean, it will not be the size that we're seeing in Calgary. So, not only with that size, we also have the flexibility of some really awesome floor plans. I mean, there's a lot more space out there to work with. So you're not finding, awkward corners or I mean, they're really easy to follow, nice square floor plans that, anybody can easily kind of live in. Right. So that's kind of just the nitty gritty about what Calgary has to offer, but it's very important to understand that they're very pro investment over there, right? So what I'm getting at is, they have low taxes, they don't have HST there. This is stuff that will actually impact an investor purchasing from Toronto or the GTA in Calgary, right? So they don't have land transfer tax, and anyone that's purchased in Ontario or in Toronto, it's double, right? You'll know that you have to, on every single property, you have to pay the province a land transfer. So that's not something that is in Calgary or Alberta altogether. So your closing costs are much, much lower, right? There's no development levies out there. I mean, on average, we're seeing 1-bedroom units in Toronto range from anywhere from, $10,000 to $15,000 just for the development levies. So these are costs you're not going to pick up in Calgary. So they're very enticing for an investor because really all you're paying is the legal fees, which, ranges anywhere from $1,200 to $1,300 or $1,400. So you just have much, much lighter investment costs on the front end.
Great. Now, how is the market otherwise? Like one of the restraints or one of the constraints that a lot of my investor clients were looking into Calgary was, well, you know what, Alberta, Supriya, is so dependent on oil and gas, and that's the industry, that's the only industry that it has been invested in for the past few years. What are the other industries that are coming up specifically in and around Calgary?
So Calgary is actually becoming a very, very, very healthy tech hub. We all know Calgary, especially if you've lived and raised or born in Canada, as always known as oil and gas, right? Yeah. And actually, they have a very strong fiscal backing because of the oil and gas. During COVID, we saw so many of the provinces kind of struggle because of, it was difficult to actually maintain jobs in so many sectors. Calgary has the lowest household debt ratio from, most of the provinces in the country, right? So they're generally lack of a better word, a richer province to begin with. But also no province, no country, no area wants to be fully dependent on one sector. So we've seen a huge investment from the government and also many, many businesses into Calgary because, as I'd mentioned, they have very low taxes. So a business that's just starting out, a tech business, and they have about over 400 tech businesses that are in Calgary right now. And 3/4 of those are actually startups, because startups are just kind of starting out and they're not looking to take on huge tax implications because they have a new business still, right? So this is a very similar kind of thing that we've seen happen, in other parts of North America. So in North America, we typically see the Silicon Valley as like the tech hub, right? But as things got much, much more, difficult to afford there, housing is incredibly difficult to afford there. We've seen this mass exodus over to Texas because Texas has much, much less tax implications for a lot of these businesses. And the folks that are coming with those businesses now have somewhere to live easily because housing is much more affordable there. So that is actually what we're kind of seeing happen with Calgary. We're seeing lots of companies and businesses and new businesses move from Toronto or the GTA GTA proper into Calgary for those reasons. So they have, literally, I encourage people to just Google the different companies that have kind of opened up shop or moved their headquarters over to Calgary. You will see lots of them. So they are diversifying their portfolio. So that's where I was getting at on the element that there's actually quite a bit of growth potential happening there.
Right. And that's where I think my comparison has always been Alberta with the Texas in States. You get decent sized homes and they're not that expensive. The cost of living is so much cheaper. The weathers are definitely at extremes. Texas.
Supriya, you say that, but Calgary is actually the sunniest city in Canada.
How about the coldest?
It's comparable. Actually, we think that, but it's exactly comparable to Montreal, right? And Montreal does get cold, and they do get a lot of sun and a lot of snow in the winter. But so does Calgary, right?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, we're great with, we're totally fine with investing in Calgary, but when it comes to living there, Toronto itself, it's like, oh my God, it's so chilly for 6 months. I don't know. We're warm-blooded.
Yes. Oh, I hear you. Yeah.
Born and brought up in India, where used to 45 degrees, and then we are thrown into -20. Yeah.
I mean, I'm born here and raised here, and I don't like the winter. So, yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. So moving along, how has been the demand for the rentals there? Better than I do, the demand for rentals in Ontario, specifically GTA, Toronto, has become crazy over the last few months, specifically, right? We are seeing bidding wars on rental properties. We are seeing people offering more than the landlord is asking for. So what is that kind of demand looking at? And my subsequent question will be, how are the landlord tenant guidelines or rules over there? Like, it is impossible, if not like a very long trial here in Ontario, if you want to evict a tenant for whatever reason. How is that compared to in Calgary?
Yes. So you're 100% right. I mean, leases are literally on fire. I've done about 8 in the last 8 weeks, and they have literally flown off the shelves. And to your point, they have actually increased the rental prices across the board in Ontario. And sorry, mostly the GTA, but Toronto proper has really seen the impacts. Like, I just leased out for an investor client of mine a studio apartment that would normally be around 1,700, maybe 1,800, depending on the ebbs and flows that we see in the market, for a very easy $2,100. And just to be clear, a studio means that there's no dedicated bedroom. It's really just, under 400 square feet, an open space. And that was one of 9 offers that came within 24 hours. So it's really as aggressive, as crazy as you actually have been hearing it is. So in Calgary, we are also seeing quite a bit of demand for rentals. And this has a lot to do with that growth that I was telling you about. There are huge growth implications kind of coming to Calgary, and lots of growth kind of, I think they're looking at just 48% increase in population by 2048 in Calgary, right? And, by comparison, in Ontario, we are looking at somewhere along the lines of 35% of a growth happening. So there's lots of growth actually happening in Alberta, in Calgary. And again, that's why this makes any sense whatsoever, because you always want to go and invest in places where there's opportunity for your property to actually get leased out, especially as an investor, right? And the interesting part is, with Platinum Condo Broker, we have been able to secure really good relationships with the builders that we're working with. So specifically, we're working with Truman Homes, which is the single largest builder in Alberta, extremely reputable. I mean, this is something that we have to provide to our clients here in the GTA. They're not there, right? They're not able to drive on the weekends and check out their property. So we've put together a package for them that works very seamlessly on kind of investing in a reputable, trustworthy builder, which is Truman Homes. Truman, we've also been able to work with them and come up with a 2-year rental guarantee and property management, because majority of our investors are not there, like I mentioned. So this is just an ease for them. So Truman will actually secure all the tenants for the properties, and they will actually do all the vetting and have them secured for all of the investment, right? So that's a really big thing that we wanted to bring forward for our clients specifically, right? Another important part is, I'm sure you've heard of assignment, right? So somebody purchasing a property, but maybe before closing, deciding they no longer want to hold on to it. Sometimes that's actually sometimes people's investment strategy altogether, right? So we've secured a $0 assignment fee with our specific investors, which means, from now until 2025, 2026, 2027, if you are thinking you no longer want to get a mortgage on this property, maybe you've purchased something, right? Or you no longer want to hold on to it because you want to invest in something else, whatever the reason is, you can, release that property back into the marketplace and not have to pay the builder an assignment fee, which typically, in Calgary ends up being around 2% of the property price.
Okay, that's such a big bonus because
Yes.
while we have a bunch of properties and we have, property management in different areas, it's always a challenge for the first few months to year or a couple of years to find the right partners, to be quite honest. And it's only after you have established a relationship within that city or that area that you're confident to add on to your portfolio specifically, right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
if there is a dedicated team that is providing those services, then you get an opportunity to settle down, I guess, as an investment. And then, of course, in 2 years is a long enough time for you to figure out who would be
Yes.
eventually the property management team, and
Exactly.
you're able to establish those contacts and stuff like that through word of mouth or whatever the research you do, and based on that you can make that decision.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a peace of mind that there is a strong rental guarantee along with property management services that are
Yeah.
provided.
And the important part, Supriya, to note here is that in those 2 years, remember, this is cash flow positive,
Yeah.
which means every month you're not going to be having to handhold the payments, right? So you have 2 years to kind of feel this all out. And that's 2 years after the property is actually up and ready. We have several years before that 2 years even start to actually get there. So you have, like, I would say easy 5 or 6 years really to kind of feel this all out.
Right. So for the current development that's happening through Truman Homes, what's the possession time that we're looking at this point? And if you want to touch upon approximate price ranges
Yes.
for some of these, available opportunities as of right
The
now.
good thing with Truman is we work exclusively with them, and they have projects coming up all the time, consistently, in all different parts of Calgary. Calgary is more of like a grid. So although we've got downtown Calgary, you've also got like the north, south, east, and west, right? So we've got projects kind of popping up all over the grid. Right. So specifically, we just wrapped up a project that was in Southwest Calgary. We are currently working on a project called Arthur, which is in the north. And then we've got a couple that are in the pipeline for downtown, which would be really interesting. Some of them will come up before the end of the year, and some are scheduled for just the beginning of 2023.
Okay, that's fantastic. Great. Now, how is the overall employment situation in Calgary? Are you seeing, first of all, a lot of, before I actually even get to the employment, are you seeing a lot of Ontario investors invest in those projects? And what are some of the objections or concerns that you're seeing that you might want to address right now?
So I would say about 45% of our investors are from the GTA, right? They're from Toronto, or Ontario proper, and that's who are investing in Calgary. And that, bottom line, just has to do with the pricing, right? And because it's cash flow positive. So those two pieces kind of make it a bit of a no-brainer for them, because outside of Calgary, we are working in an environment where, the pricing is so much more than the $300,000, $400,000 price range that we're seeing in Alberta. So because of that, although the nice part about pre-construction is that you don't have to pay that 20% like right up front, but you still do have to pay it, right? It could be over a year and a half or 2 years and a half, but ultimately, having to have 20% of $750,000 compared to 20% of $300,000 is a really big difference. So oftentimes we're seeing people pick up more than one property, even like maybe a townhouse and a condo downtown, right? So it's very common for people to easily kind of invest in Calgary, knowing that they want to diversify their actual portfolio outside of maybe what they already have here.
Okay, so how do you facilitate or how do you help the investors kind of figure out which project they should be investing in? Is there any meetups that happen, or there's a mailer that goes out and whoever wants to reach out to you would reach out to you? What's the plan behind that?
So it's a combination of a little bit of both of them. Typically, I like to kind of know more one-on-one what my client is actually looking for. That's just my style, to really understand what their goals are, what their future real estate goals are also, right? So taking a look at that holistically, I think I could best kind of tell you 2 or 3 options that kind of fit into that quite nicely. Because like you'd mentioned, like we have detached homes, there's townhomes, there's condos, and then there's different pockets all over the city that would maybe suit a different personality type or investor. So taking a look at all of those elements would really kind of just bring together what your options are. On the flip side, we also have mailers that go out. So every time a new project comes out, we'd send out the details around it, the floor plans, what the specs look like, what the renderings look like, what that specific building looks like. So these are all things that I find should be and are of interest to most investors.
Yep, that's definitely much really helpful. And in terms of the closing and that process, do you
Yes.
facilitate that process as well? Like, do you have an in-house lawyer or a team that you would refer to? How does that come about?
We do. So we actually work with a couple of lawyers. So this way I can refer several of them to you, and you can kind of pick, which one works best for you. But we do have Calgary lawyers that are in Alberta that work there and kind of understand, the market there better than here. So we would introduce you to them. You kind of get a feel for kind of how they each work and maybe what their costs are. And, bringing up that cost element, we do work with preferred ones. So you would be able to get, a bit more of a deal, I would say, on some of the ones that we specifically are working with.
Okay, and for these projects, is Truman Homes looking for that mortgage commitment letter once the offer has been presented? Because that's a typical ask from most of the developers that I work with in Alberta and Ontario.
So they have been asking for them, but they're much more like flexible. I would say, like here in Toronto, if you did not have that mortgage commitment letter on day 3, there goes your unit to somebody else, actually, right? There it's just not as urgent, right?
Yeah.
So there is time to get that together. And we also do work with mortgage brokers like yourself that kind of can facilitate that to happen sooner than later.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, because these things are important. You want to make sure that you have ducks in a row to
Yes.
have a smoother experience for yourself. So
Yeah.
I coach my clients to be well prepared. When you're ready to make that offer, all we need is that updated APS, and
Yeah.
like you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, perfect. Any final thoughts, any final comments, Mindy, before we wrap up?
I might just want to speak to your listeners, your viewers, because I mean, real estate is something that everyone, like I'd mentioned, has some kind of interest with, right? But on the large part, it's not something we do all the time. I mean, we'd love to be making purchases all the time, I'm sure. But realistically speaking, people tend to make investments or purchases or selling every 5 to 10 years, and 5 being on the lower side, it's typically once a decade. So it's something that, we're not always the most comfortable doing, or maybe the environment has changed, right? So I encourage people, especially kind of the way that I like to work, is really ask those questions and understand what your options are and what specifically the market has to do with your specific investment, because that does change and it does make a difference to pre-construction or resale. So I just wanted to kind of, touch on that, because I think it's important that people understand that I'm here to answer any of those questions, and I can kind of facilitate, the answers around other questions that might be around Calgary or even some Toronto investments that we have.
Perfect. And how can our listeners reach out to you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Call me. I'm on Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm on TikTok, most social media. I'm very engaged in those. I really use them as a tool to kind of educate my clients or my viewership. So I really hope that, that resonates with yourself. And then you can always just reach out to me, an email, a quick text, or a call, and we can chat.
Perfect. And we'll have your contact information on the show notes as well. So guys, please, if anybody is interested in Calgary market or has any questions regarding pre-construction or any sale purchase that's happening within GTA or Calgary, Mindy is your go-to person. Do reach out to her. Well, thank you so much, Mindy, for your time today. I really appreciate it. This was really helpful.
Same to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.